It was supposed to be another Thursday night. The Tonight Show stage was set. The band was ready. The audience filed in with their usual anticipation, programs folded in their laps, eager for laughs they could retell at breakfast tables the next morning. Johnny Carson stood backstage, straightening his tie in that particular way he had, not out of vanity but ritual. Control lived in small gestures. Dean Martin was scheduled to sit in the guest chair at 11:47 p.m. No one in Studio 6B at NBC Burbank knew what was coming, not the cameramen adjusting their lenses, not Ed McMahon leafing through cue cards with bourbon-scented breath, not even Carson himself, though later he would say he felt something that afternoon, a pressure in his chest, the kind that comes before weather changes. Dean Martin had been on the show 43 times before, each appearance a masterclass in effortless charm, the glass of whiskey that may or may not have been apple juice, the half-sung joke, the way he made every woman in America feel like he was singing just to them. He and Carson shared something unspoken. Two men who had learned to perform feelings they rarely showed off stage. But this night was different. The date was March 12, 1987. Dean Martin was 69 years old. His son, Dean Paul Martin, had died in a military jet crash 7 months earlier. The world knew this, of course. It had been in every newspaper. But the world did not know what it does to a father to bury his child, how it empties certain rooms inside you that never refurnish themselves. Carson was 51. He had lost his own son, Richard, in a car accident in 1991. Wait, no. That hadn't happened yet. In March of 1987, all three of Carson's sons were still alive, still navigating their own complicated relationships with a father who could make millions laugh, but struggled to say, "I love you," across a dinner table. Perhaps that's why what happened that night hit so hard. The show opened as it always did. Carson's monologue landed with precision. Presidents were mocked. Airlines were roasted. The audience laughed on cue, a warm-up for the real event. But those who worked with Carson every night noticed something in his eyes during the commercial break. A flicker. He was thinking about something that hadn't happened yet. At 11:46, Dean Martin walked through the curtain. The applause was immediate and genuine. Here was a man America had watched for decades, on stages in Vegas, in films opposite Jerry Lewis, crooning through Christmas specials that became tradition. He wore a dark suit, impeccably tailored. His hair was still thick, carefully styled, but anyone paying close attention could see it. The weight. He moved slower than he used to. His smile, once instantaneous, took a half-second longer to appear. And when he sat down, settling into the chair beside Carson's desk, he looked not at the audience but past them, toward some middle distance only he could see. Carson extended his hand. They shook. The greeting was warm but careful, like two men meeting near the edge of something fragile. "Dean Martin, ladies and gentlemen," Carson said, and the audience roared again. "Johnny," Dean said. His voice still had that honey-smooth quality, but underneath it was something else. Gravel. Fatigue. They began talking. Carson asked about Dean's golf game. Dean made a joke about his swing. The audience laughed. This was the dance they both knew. Question, quip, laughter, repeat. It had worked for decades. It was supposed to work tonight. But then Carson asked about the new album. Dean paused. Just for a moment. Maybe 2 seconds. But in television, 2 seconds is an eternity. "Yeah, we got some songs recorded," Dean said. "Good stuff. The kind of thing people remember." "Songs about what?" Carson asked. It was an innocent question, the kind of setup he'd asked 1,000 times. Dean looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time that night, the performance slipped. "Songs about things you lose," Dean said quietly. The studio didn't go silent immediately. There were still a few scattered chuckles from people who thought this was part of the bit. But Carson heard it, the shift in Dean's voice, the crack in the facade. Carson leaned back slightly. He had a choice here. He could pivot, make a joke, pull them both back to safer ground. That was his job, after all, to keep things light, to never let the audience feel uncomfortable. But he didn't. "What kind of things?" Carson asked. Dean's hands rested on the armrests of the chair. His fingers, still adorned with rings that caught the stage lights, gripped slightly tighter. "Time," Dean said. "People, kids." The last word hung in the air. Now the audience was quiet. Not the manufactured quiet of a dramatic pause, but the real kind. The kind that happens when people collectively realize they're witnessing something unplanned. Ed McMahon, sitting to the left at his desk, stopped shuffling papers. Doc Severinsen, normally ready with a musical sting to transition moments, simply waited. The camera operators kept their lenses steady, but you could feel the tension rippling through the crew. Should they cut to commercial? Was this going somewhere they could air? Carson didn't look away. He held Dean's gaze with something that looked like understanding. "You talking about Dean Paul?" Carson asked. Gentle, direct. Dean nodded. Once, a small movement that contained everything. "He was a good kid," Carson said. "The best," Dean replied. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. 35 years old, flying a goddamn plane for the Air National Guard, and it just stops working. Mid-air. And you can't do anything about it. You can't call him back. You can't fix it. The audience was completely still now. Some people had their hands over their mouths. Others stared at the stage with the kind of attention you give to moments you know you'll remember. Carson's face did something rare. It showed everything. The mask of the professional host, the quick wit, the easy charm, the controlled demeanor, all of it fell away. What remained was just a man, sitting across from another man who was hurting. "I can't imagine," Carson said, and you could hear in his voice that he meant it, but also that he was imagining it. Right there, what it would feel like. Dean looked down at his hands. "You think you're supposed to go first, you know? That's the deal. Parents go first. Kids get to have their lives, get to make their own mistakes, fall in love, have kids of their own. That's how it's supposed to work." "Yeah," Carson said. "Just that." A single word of agreement. "But nobody tells you what to do when it doesn't work that way," Dean continued. "They send flowers, they call, they say they're sorry, and you say thank you, and you smile, and you do the shows because that's what you do. But inside," he trailed off. "Inside you're not the same," Carson finished. Dean looked up at him. "No, you're not." There was a long pause, maybe 15 seconds. On television, that's almost unbearable. Producers in the booth were probably scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage this, but no one cut away. No one interrupted. Finally, Carson spoke. "You want to take a break?" "No," Dean said, firm. "No, I want to say this." Carson nodded. "Okay." Dean turned slightly, addressing not just Carson but the camera. The millions watching at home in their living rooms and bedrooms, eating late-night snacks, fighting off sleep. "If you got kids," Dean said, "call them tomorrow. Even if you fought, even if they don't call you back right away, even if you think there's time, because maybe there isn't." His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, but it cracked, and that's when it happened. The thing no one expected. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who had built a career on never appearing rattled, began to cry. Not sobbing, not theatrically, just tears running down his face under the hot stage lights, while he sat in front of 300 people and several million more beyond the cameras. Carson didn't move to comfort him, didn't reach out with a hand on the shoulder or a reassuring pat. He understood something crucial in that moment, that some grief can't be fixed with gestures. It can only be witnessed. The audience didn't know what to do. A few people wiped their own eyes. Most just sat frozen, unsure if they should clap or stay silent or leave. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, Dean took a breath, wiped his face with the back of his hand in a gesture so human, so stripped of performance, it almost hurt to watch. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," Carson interrupted. "Don't apologize." Dean looked at him. "You're exactly where you should be," Carson said, saying exactly what you need to say. There was something in Carson's voice, a weight. Years later, people would wonder if he knew something then. If he sensed that his own son Richard would die just a few years later in 1991 in a car accident while photographing landscapes. If he understood, in some deep, unspoken way, that he and Dean were both members of a club no one wants to join. But in that moment, he was just present. Fully there. Not the host, not the comedian, just a man bearing witness to another man's pain. Dean straightened up, took another breath. "You got good kids, Johnny?" Carson paused. This was dangerous territory for him. He rarely spoke about his family on air. His divorces had been public and messy. His relationship with his sons was complicated. strained by fame and absence and all the things that happen when your job is to be everyone's favorite late-night companion, and that leaves less time to be someone's father. I got 3 sons, Carson said carefully. We're working on it. Dean nodded. Work on it, he said. Don't wait. I won't, Carson said. Whether he kept that promise or not, history doesn't fully record, but the look on his face in that moment suggested he meant it. Doc Severinsen, sensing the moment needed transition, started a soft musical underscore. Nothing dramatic, just gentle chords giving the moment a place to land. Carson looked at the camera. We'll be right back, he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were red. The show cut to commercial. What happened during that break, only the people there know. Some crew members later said Dean and Carson sat together in silence. Others said they talked quietly, words too low for anyone else to hear. Ed McMahon reportedly brought them both drinks, real ones this time, not props. When they came back from commercial, the tone had shifted. Dean told a funny story about Frank Sinatra. Carson made a joke about golf. The audience, grateful for the release, laughed loudly. The machine of late-night television resumed its function, but something had changed. Dean Martin would appear on The Tonight Show only a few more times after that night. Each appearance was professional, charming, exactly what you'd expect, but people who watched closely said he was different. More present in some ways, less concerned with the performance. He died 8 years later, on Christmas Day, 1995. The official cause was acute respiratory failure, but those close to him said he'd been dying slowly since the day his son's plane went down. Grief, it turns out, is a long illness. Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in 1992. His final episode was watched by 50 million people. He made jokes. He thanked the audience. He played with a yo-yo. But in one brief moment, near the end, he looked into the camera and said something that echoed what Dean had told him that March night in 1987. Don't wait, Carson said. Whatever you're putting off, saying, doing, fixing, don't wait. Time isn't as long as you think. People watching assumed he was talking about retirement, about seizing the day, about living fully. But maybe he was thinking about a different night, about a conversation that broke through all the practiced lines and careful timing. About a moment when 2 performers stopped performing and just sat together in the truth of what it means to lose, to grieve, to try to keep going when part of you wants to stop. The footage of that Dean Martin interview was archived. It occasionally surfaces on retrospective programs and YouTube compilations. People watch it and comment, "This is real. You can see the pain. This is what television used to be." But what they're really responding to is rarer than authenticity. What they're seeing is 2 men who built careers on controlled presentation, allowing themselves, for just a few minutes, to be uncontrolled, unprepared, honest. In the weeks after that show aired, Carson received hundreds of letters. Many were from parents who had also lost children. They thanked Dean for speaking. They thanked Carson for listening. They said it helped, somehow, to see grief acknowledged on television instead of hidden away. Carson kept those letters in a drawer in his office. Years later, after his own son died, he would reread them, trying to find in other people's words some map through the unmappable territory of that particular loss. There's a photo that exists from backstage that night. It's not widely circulated, but it's in the NBC archives. Dean and Carson, standing side by side, not looking at the camera. Dean's hand is on Carson's shoulder. Carson's head is slightly bowed. They look like 2 soldiers after a battle, exhausted but still standing. The photographer who took it said he almost didn't. It felt like an intrusion, but something told him to document it anyway. They looked like they were holding each other up, he said later, and I thought, somebody should remember this. What happens when famous people stop being famous for a moment and just become people? When the scripts fail and the cue cards offer nothing useful and all that's left is 2 humans trying to navigate something that has no good navigation. That's what happened the night Dean Martin came to The Tonight Show and couldn't keep it together. When Johnny Carson could have steered away but chose to stay. When 300 people in a studio audience and millions more at home watched something real unfold in a medium built on artifice. The show ended that night at 12:30 a.m., as it always did. The audience filed out, the crew broke down the set. Carson went home to his Malibu house overlooking the Pacific. Dean probably returned to his home in Beverly Hills, to rooms that felt too big, too quiet. Life continued. It always does. The sun rose the next morning. People went to work. New episodes of The Tonight Show aired. The machine of entertainment kept turning. But for those who watched that night, something stayed with them. A feeling, a permission, maybe, to acknowledge that beneath all our performances, the roles we play at work, in public, even with family, there's a person. Fragile, hurting sometimes, trying to make sense of loss that doesn't make sense. Years after both men died, a television critic wrote an essay about that interview. He called it, "The Night Late Night Got Real." But that title, though catchy, missed something essential. It wasn't that the show got real. It was that two men, trapped in the machinery of celebrity and performance, found a way to be real with each other. And in doing so, they gave everyone watching permission to do the same. In the end, that's what people remember. Not the jokes, not the celebrity guests or the musical performances or the carefully scripted bits. They remember the moment when Dean Martin's voice broke and Johnny Carson didn't look away. When the script was abandoned and all that remained was two men, honest about pain, sitting together in the light. The studio went silent that night. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, full of shared understanding of what it means to love someone, and then have to figure out how to keep living when they're gone. That's the story no one was supposed to tell on late-night television. The one that doesn't have a punchline or a happy ending. The one that just is. But they told it anyway, and we're still listening.